Ladies and gentlemen, a storm is quietly gathering on the horizon of global trade, and its origins are in the East. Picture a world where everything you depend on, your smartphone, your television, the solar panels on your rooftop, even the ingredients in the food you eat, suddenly becomes twice as expensive or disappears entirely. Now imagine that this world is no longer a distant possibility, but a reality we may already be stepping into. In recent months, reports have emerged showing that China, the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, is increasingly tightening its control over exports to the United States. What does this mean for global trade? Could this decisive move from China serve as a catalyst for smaller nations to reconsider their dependence on the US-led global trade systems? And could it signal the beginning of the end for an era in which the US economy has held the reins of global commerce for decades? For much of the 20th century, the world's economy revolved around a US-centric model. The United States dominated the global trade system, and this economic architecture helped cement its status as a superpower. But in recent years, as China has grown into a global economic juggernaut, the balance of power is beginning to shift. A recent Bloomberg report revealed a staggering 20% decline in U.S. imports of Chinese goods last year, signaling a deliberate decoupling effort between the two nations. Meanwhile, trade between China and emerging markets, including Brazil, India, and ASEAN countries, is thriving. This prompts an important question. Are we witnessing the tipping point where the U.S.'s leadership in global trade begins to crumble? China's economic strategy is becoming clearer by the day. In 2023 alone, trade between China and BRICS nations expanded by a staggering 30%. This is a deliberate move by China to pivot away from U.S.-dominated economic systems, which have long shaped global commerce. These numbers paint a compelling picture of a global power shift, one that could completely reshape international relations and economic dynamics. Now let's look at something that might seem small but is far from insignificant. Rare earth minerals. Over 90% of the world's rare earth minerals, critical for technologies like semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, and even military defense systems, are processed in China. A report from the White House back in 2021 warned that the U.S. reliance on Chinese rare earths was a significant national security risk. But despite this warning, little has been done to mitigate this vulnerability. If China were to halt the export of these crucial materials, industries in the U.S., particularly those related to automotive manufacturing and renewable energy, would face crippling shortages. According to the Semiconductor Industry Association, the U.S. produces only 12% of the world's semiconductors, while China dominates more than 50% of the supply chain. So the question remains, can America's tech giants survive such a blow? Would they be able to navigate the potential fallout of losing access to the very materials that power the modern economy? Geopolitical strategist Peter Zeihan has warned that China's growing export control mechanisms pose a direct challenge to the complacency of Western supply chains. The ripple effects of such a move would be nothing short of catastrophic. According to a study by McKinsey, rebuilding a self-sufficient semiconductor industry in the U.S. could cost over $1 trillion and take more than a decade. The real question here is whether the United States can afford such an expensive and time-consuming project. Or will the country find itself forced to compromise on its geopolitical stance as it faces the reality of a changing global landscape? Look around your home for a moment. From your TV to your kitchen appliances, almost everything carries the Made in China label. What happens when these goods become unaffordable or unavailable? A survey by the Consumer Technology Association reveals that over 70% of electronics sold in the U.S. are sourced from China. Already, Americans are feeling the squeeze of rising prices. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that the prices of electronics in the U.S. increased by 15%, largely due to ongoing trade tensions with China. Imagine that price hike doubling if China were to halt exports altogether. Could U.S. manufacturers ramp up production quickly enough to meet demand? Historically, when there are disruptions in the supply chain, it takes years for domestic industries to catch up. And the cost to U.S. households would be significant. According to a study by the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the average American family could face an additional $22,000 in annual expenses if tariffs and export restrictions continue. The question is, will the American public accept these sacrifices, or will policymakers face growing pressure and backlash? Meanwhile, China is strengthening its trade relationships with emerging economies through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. Countries like Brazil, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia are beginning to pivot toward China's orbit, signaling a shift away from traditional U.S.-led trade alliances. This strategic decoupling from the U.S. sends a powerful message to smaller nations. It's time to rethink their place in the global economic order. India's recent decision to settle trade with Russia in rupees rather than dollars is a perfect example of this shift. Likewise, nations in the ASEAN region are exploring regional payment systems to reduce reliance on Western financial structures. These moves by China and its allies are starting to reshape the global economy. The rise of multipolar trade blocs, like BRICS, which now accounts for more than 31% of global GDP, is a clear signal of a new economic architecture that bypasses traditional U.S. dominance. The U.S. has long criticized its trade deficits with China, but recent trade data reveals a paradox. While U.S. imports from China have declined, U.S. exports of agricultural goods like soybeans and wheat have surged by 25% in 2023. This highlights the interdependence that exists between the two largest economies in the world, a relationship that even the strictest policies cannot easily sever. At the same time, China's advancements in technology, from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, are challenging the technological hegemony the U.S. has held for decades. A report by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace suggests that restrictive policies from the U.S. could backfire, inadvertently pushing China towards self-sufficiency faster than expected. This raises an important question. Is the U.S. successfully containing China's rise, or is it merely accelerating it? In the 1980s, the U.S. imposed tariffs and trade restrictions on Japanese automakers to protect domestic industries. These measures provided short-term relief, but also forced Japanese companies to innovate and diversify. As a result, companies like Toyota and Honda emerged stronger than ever, capturing significant global market share. Could a similar scenario unfold with China? Economist Jeffrey Sachs argues that economic containment often produces unintended consequences. Today, China is investing billions in global infrastructure projects, much like Japan did in the 1980s. The question is, will history repeat itself? Or will the U.S. adopt a strategy that fosters collaboration rather than conflict? The overuse of financial sanctions has also led to an increasing number of nations seeking alternatives. China's trade agreements with countries like Russia and Brazil, along with the BRICS nations' exploration of a new reserve currency, are gaining momentum. The U.S. dollar's dominance in global reserves has been steadily declining, falling from 71% in 1999 to just 58% in 2023. Could this trend signal the end of dollar dominance in global trade? If the U.S. dollar loses its central role, the U.S. will find it increasingly difficult to impose its will on the rest of the world, warns economist Eswar Prasad of Cornell University. The implications for global markets could be profound, potentially triggering inflationary pressures and destabilizing economies that rely on dollar-denominated trade. For decades, the U.S. has championed free trade and open markets. But recent actions, such as imposing tariffs and blacklisting Chinese firms, have contradicted these ideals. Emerging powers are now demanding reciprocity and mutual respect, challenging the U.S. to live up to its own principles. Is the world moving toward a multipolar system where no single nation dominates? And if so, what role will the U.S. play in this new global landscape? While the challenges are immense, crises often breed opportunity. Could this be the moment for the U.S. to reinvest in its infrastructure, boost domestic manufacturing, and prioritize innovation? Programs like the CHIPS Act, which allocates $52 billion to boost semiconductor manufacturing, are steps in the right direction. But more comprehensive policies will be needed to ensure resilience and competitiveness in the years ahead. In conclusion, this is not just another trade disruption. It is a pivotal moment for the U.S. and the global economy. Whether this signals the collapse of the U.S.-centric order or sparks a renewal of American strength depends on the decisions we make today. But one thing is clear. Are policymakers ready to face the challenge? Or will they allow history to repeat itself once again? The future of global trade is in the balance, and only time will tell how these shifts will shape the world in the years to come. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Leave your comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful discussions. Thank you for watching.